Silent Hill 2, a game talked by many, played by a few. Have you ever wanted to know what it's all about but then realized that it's not a third-person open-world looter shooter game? Well, don't worry, because in this video I will explain it as fast as possible. So, let's start. In Silent Hill 2, we will play as James Sunderland, your typical American husband who is inside a public bathroom touching his face. And it seems like it's just another day in the life of a middle-aged man, except for the fact that he's in that place because he recently received a letter from his wife Mary where she asked him to meet her at their special place in Silent Hill. The only problem with this? She died 3 years ago from a sickness. But James is trying to ignore that last part, and because the whole town was their special place, James assumes that Mary meant the park next to a lake, where they shared a very nice silence. So he's trying to find his way to that place, although for some reason the roads to the town are closed. Because of this, James decides to go through the forest and see if he can make it through there, and after some walking and some walking and some walking and some, James reaches a cemetery where he comes across a girl who seems to be looking for something and who also seems to be a little bit jumpy. But since James is kind of lost, he asks her for directions to the town, and she tells him that there's only one road to follow, but that he should be cautious, because it's not only the fog he should worry about. And after she tells him that she's looking for her mother, father and brother, James arrives at the town of Silent Hill. But something seems to be off, and after following some bloody marks, he discovers that, yep, definitely something is off. He then starts exploring the town, where he finds some kind of worn-out monument about a swamp that was there before the town was built, a text on a window inside a bar that talks about how a hole appeared and then disappeared, a dead body with some torn pages around that talk about how the demons might be just illusions and that they react to light and sound, and another dead body with a key to the apartment's gate. Once inside them, James discovers that that place is really dark. But he finds a mannequin that has a working flashlight and a very cute outfit that, weirdly enough, reminds James of... Thanks to the flashlight, James is able to see a key that is behind some kind of gate. Of course, James tries to grab it, but some little kid comes out of nowhere and kicks the key away, and also has the audacity of stepping on his hand. James, obviously, tries to stop the kid, but since there's a gate, she is able to run away while he just stands there. Because of this, he starts looking for another way to get the key, and after finding a gun in one of the rooms and hearing a muffled scream in the middle of the hallway, he comes across another gate where someone or something seems to be watching him. James, naturally, ignores it, and after finding a dead body watching TV, sticking his hand inside a mysterious hole and uncovering a hidden passage behind a clock, James enters another room where he comes across the thing that was looking at him before. But it seems to be occupied with something else. So James, like any other normal person, goes to hide inside a closet and watches the action unfold. But the thing kind of notices James, so he doesn't have any other option than to start blasting. Following this, and after finding the key that the girl kicked, a magazine that talks about how a killer named Walter Sullivan, who seemed to be a little bit cray-cray, killed himself inside his cell, and a nice pamphlet that talks about how Silent Hill is a nice place to visit, James comes across a room where there's a dead body inside a fridge and some strange sounds coming from the bathroom. Obviously, James goes to investigate, and here he meets Eddie, who is blabbering about stuff, and since James doesn't even know what the guy is talking about, he changes the subject by asking him if he knows the Pyramid Head thing, to which Eddie answers with a "what?" Although he has seen the monsters, and like James, he's in that town because of reasons. After some more talking and some more... James leaves Eddie and keeps looking for a way to get out of there, and he finds it. Kind of, because he ends up in another apartment building where, after sticking his hand in yet another nasty hole, he comes across the girl of the cemetery, whose name is Angela, who who seems to be contemplating a mirror and a knife. Here, James tries to stop her from whatever she's thinking of doing, and after talking about some stuff like her missing mom, his dead wife, how they are kind of the same, and how they both deserve what's happening to them, Angela tells James that she needs to go. So James offers to go with her, but she declines the offer and tries to give him her knife since she doesn't trust herself around it. But when James attempts to reach for it, she gets defensive, panics, and runs away. James then enters another room where he runs into the pyramid head thing, doing even more stuff. But this time, it seems to be ready to fight. Thank God, James is able to survive this encounter, and after the monster goes away, James is finally able to get out of the apartments. But while walking through the street, he notices the little kid that stepped on his hand, who is just sitting on a wall without a curl in the world. So James asks her about the letter that she has on her hand, to which she responds by telling him,
"You didn't love Mary anyway."
James, perplexed by this, wants to know how she knows that name, but by the time he finishes his sentence, the girl is already gone. He then arrives at the park he was looking for, where he meets Mary, who, for some bizarre reason, looks and sounds a lot like Mary, but it's not. They talk for a little bit before James comes to the conclusion that maybe that's not the place Mary meant, so his next guess is the hotel that was on the lake. But since Maria doesn't want to be alone in that place, she starts following him, even though James is a little bit reluctant about that. And after reading a memorial that talks about how 67 people are now sleeping beneath the lake, another one of a girl named Jennifer Carroll, and finding a dead body with a map that has Pete's Bolorama marked on it, James discovers that the road that can take him to the hotel is going to be hard to cross. So... They then arrive at the Bolorama, where Maria tells James she is going to wait for him while he checks it out, since she would rather be alone in a place full of monsters than inside a bowling place. Once inside it, James overhears Eddie and the little kid talking about how Eddie is running from the cops because he did something bad, and how the little kid is also looking for Mary. But when James finds them, the kid, whose name turns out to be Laura, runs away. Because of this, James tries to go after her with Eddie's help, although Eddie seems to be unwilling to chase anyone. So James leaves him and his pizza alone and goes outside. And since Maria was there when the kid went out, she tells James they should go after her, which they do. But this chasing makes them go through a building where James finds some alcohol bottles, which remind him of the fact that he drinks to be able to get away from the pain and loneliness. You know, because of depression. James and Maria then are able to see the kid running towards the hospital, so they go inside. And here, after finding a note that talks about how an illness can take people to the other side, which is like reality but not really, Maria and James enter one of the hospital bedrooms, where she tells him that she feels a little bit tired, so she's going to lay on the bed while he looks for Laura. James, alone again, goes to the roof, where he finds a diary, gets locked out, and gets attacked by the pyramid head thing. Luckily, James survives the fall and is able to find Laura, who is just playing with some teddy bears like nothing is wrong. Both of them then have a conversation about how she knows Mary, which according to her is because apparently she met her at the hospital, even though that wouldn't be possible since Mary was already dead.
You liar!
James then tells her that they need to get out of there. However, Laura tells him that she needs to go pick up a letter from Mary. So James offers to go pick it up for her. But damn it, he was all a ruse. And James ends up locked inside a room full of monsters. After defeating them, James seems to be transported to another part of the hospital, but something seems different. Here, James tries to look for Maria, but the only thing he finds are some empty medicine bottles that seem to belong to her. And after hearing some weird noises and finding a hidden passage in the basement, James is surprised by Mary, who seems to be a little bit overwhelmed since she was all alone. And here, she basically tells James that he only cares about his dead wife and not about her, and that he should protect her, and that they should keep looking for Laura because she feels the need to protect her. Well, James then participates in a radio challenge that starts in the middle of the elevator, which also acknowledges him by name. And they also shared a very nice moment where Maria basically calls James a weakling and gives him a key.
Thanks.
However, after finding a note that talks about how a guy hid the key of the museum behind the praying woman, all this chemistry falls apart because the pyramid head thing starts chasing them through a corridor, where Maria gets impaled in front of James' eyes while he just stands there. Obviously, James gets sad. But he then finds a map that has some marks on it and some weird message that talks about how someone is not bold to stare into an abyss if they are not bold enough to be stared at from across it, and that the truth can only be learned by going forward. Oh yeah, and he also notices Laura running on the street, so he goes out of the hospital, where he starts thinking about Maria's death, Laura's running, and Mary's true intentions, which are either to wait for James or to take... The point is that James decides that he is going to find Mary, even if it's the last thing he does. James, after reading another note that keeps talking about the abyss, the truth, and how they are inside the museum, looking at some writing on a wall, and getting the key for the museum, ends up inside the museum. And here, he finds a painting where the pyramid head thing and the creatures that attacked him are depicted, and also a picture of a hole? James then goes down some long stairs that take him to a prison where he finds the hole that was in the picture. Of course, James just jumps inside it, and after some he finds another hole. So... James then encounters Eddie, who is next to a dead person holding a gun and looking a little bit deranged. Oh yeah, and he's talking about how killing is no big deal, how he had it coming like the other guy and the dog, and how they were making fun of him with his eyes. You know, normal stuff. But it was all a joke. Don't even worry about it. After this short conversation, Eddie goes away and James starts looking around the place. And here, he finds some black magic books, some strange symbols on the wall, some invisible creatures, some drawings that depict a girl flying, some people in a recital, and a man burning inside a house, and a weird totem that seems to be depicting two of the pyramid head things hanging a man, which also emits a weird sound after James places the tablets of the seductress, the oppressor, and the gluttonous pig. And after finding a magazine that talks about how there have been strange accidents happening around the Toluca Lake and a diary that talks about how prisoners always try to justify themselves, James uncovers another hole. James then ends up in some kind of morgue where he sees something inside one of the holes, and where he finds yet another hole, and then another. And then an elevator that only goes down, and then a room where he finds Maria?
I'm not your Mary.
Oh, okay. Here, both of them have a conversation about how he saw her die, how none of that happened, how he forgot a videotape they made in the hotel, and how he wants to touch her. Because of this, James goes back from where he came from to find a way to get to Maria. But on his way, he comes across a bloody newspaper that talks about how the body of a man named Thomas was discovered, and since he had a history of drunkenness and violence, and the money that he had wasn't touched, the police think someone murdered him for personal reasons. Here, James enters a hallway where there's a lot of newspapers scattered everywhere, and where he hears the pleas of Angela asking her father to stop. And to his surprise, the room where Angela is seems to be different from all the others, with fleshy walls and floors, and with some kind of pumping going on. But that's not the weirdest part, because in a corner, some type of fleshy, trembling, and very kind of sexual monster is trying to attack Angela. So... after defeating the creature, James tries to talk with her, but Angela seems to be a little bit out of it, and following some violent behavior against the now dead beast. She insinuates that James is just helping her to get one thing in return, just like her father did, who also forced her and beat her up to get it. She also tells James that she knows him and that he didn't want Mary around anymore and that he probably found someone else, which gives James something to think about. He then is able to reach the room where Maria was, but when he enters it, he discovers that she is dead.
Never thought it would end like this, huh? Huh, Maria?
But he decides to keep going forward until he arrives at some kind of cemetery that has a bunch of tombstones around, with names like Miriam Kay and Walter Sullivan. However, in one of the corners, James finds 3 aligned tombstones that have his, Eddie's, and Angela's name inscribed on them. And even weirder, his side has a hole he can get in. This takes him to some kind of hallway that starts turning bloody the more he gets near the door, and inside it he finds that the room, like Angela's, is very different from the others, except that this one seems more like a slaughterhouse. And here he also finds Eddie, who at this point seems to have lost it completely, since he is saying stuff like, "You fat disgusting piece of shit, and just like a horse." James, of course, asks him if he has gone nuts.
Read the room, James.
Which obviously doesn't go well with the now very cray-cray Eddie.
I'll kill you, James!
Eddie then runs away and starts telling James that people have always bullied him because of his appearance, and also that he shot the owner of the dog that he enjoyed. Oh yeah, and that he and James aren't that different since the town called both of them for the same reason. After James kills him, kind of feels bad about it, and tries to remember if Mary really died 3 years ago, he ends up in a dock, where following a nice boat trip, he finally reaches the hotel. Here, after finding a map that has a room marked with the words "waiting for you," Laura jumpscares James and both of them have a conversation where he discovers that she is also there to find Mary, and that Mary and her talked a lot about Silent Hill. She then gives James the letter that she had before, where Maria, in short, tells her that she is in a quiet and beautiful place, that she would have adopted her if things were different, that James, deep down, is a really sweet person, and that she wishes her a happy 8th birthday, which catches James by surprise since Laura just turned 8 last week, giving him hopes that Mary could still be alive. And adding to this, Laura also tells James that she has another letter from Mary, but when she tries to show it to him, she realizes that she doesn't have it anymore. So she goes away to look for it, and after finding the tape he and his wife did, James is able to reach the room that was marked in the map, where he sits down and plays it.
Are you taping again? Come on. You know what I heard? This whole area used to be a sacred place. Please promise you'll take me again, James.
Once he finishes watching it, James gets sad and Laura bursts in asking him if he found the letter or even Mary. But since he now knows the truth, he tells Laura that he killed her. Obviously, Laura doesn't take it too well and goes away, while James just sits there, lost in the nothingness. However, he gets brought back to reality when the TV starts emitting a voice that sounds a lot like Mary, or Maria, who is asking him to find her because she is waiting for him. So, James gets up and continues going forward, although the hotel now seems different. James then enters a room where he finds Angela admiring some kind of skin art, and after she confuses him with her mama for a moment, they have a conversation about how she wished he didn't save her, how her mother blamed her for what happened, how she isn't worth it, how she wants her knife back, how the place is hot as hell, how she's surprised about the fact that James can see the fire too, and how it's always like that for her. She then just goes upstairs while a wall of fire rises behind her. So, James then arrives at a place where there's 9 red papers on a wall and a big door that takes him to a room where 2 pyramid head things kill Maria in front of him. Thanks to this, James realizes that those things were there just to punish him for his sins, and since he already knows what's up, he doesn't need them anymore. So, after defeating both of them, James then arrives at a corridor where a memory of a conversation between him and Mary can be heard, which is...
James, wait. Please don't go. Stay with me. I said, please, James, tell me I'll be okay. Tell me I'm not going to die. Help me.
He then goes up a lot of stairs, and at the top, James finally meets with Mary. But since this game has different endings... If James keeps himself healthy, doesn't do stupid stuff, doesn't let Maria tell him the way he should head to, and listens to the whole corridor conversation, then Mary will tell James that he is stupid, because she isn't actually Mary, but Maria. However, James tells her that he doesn't need her anymore, and Maria doesn't take it too well. He then is finally able to have a conversation with the real Mary, where James admits that he, sadly, hated her and wanted his life back. Although Mary can see that he's remorseful about it, so she kind of forgives him and tells him to keep going with his life. And in the last screen, we can see him and Laura getting out of Silent Hill. But if instead of all that, James listens to Maria, tries to be with her more time than necessary, and overall shows that he cares a lot about her, then Mary will tell him that he a bitch, and that she won't forgive him for what he did. He then will be at the park where he met Maria, and here Maria will ask him if he killed Mary again. But he kind of excuses himself by telling her that that wasn't even Mary, and that he wants her. And in the last screen, we can see him and Maria going to his car. But when he hears her coughing, he tells her in a very passive-aggressive way,
"You'd better do something about that cough."
And if James checks out Angela's knife, doesn't keep healthy, reads the diary that is on the rooftop of the hospital, reads the message on the wall of the bar that tells him to die, hears the recorded conversation where a doctor tells James that Mary is going to die, and listens to the whole conversation of the corridor, then the same things that happen in the live ending will happen here, but with different wording. Although, at the end, Mary won't be able to tell James to keep going with his life. So he will pick her up, and in the last screen, we will be able to hear James saying that without her, he has nothing, but that they can be together again. Oh, and do you want to be even more sad? Well, in all of these endings, James receives the other letter from Mary, and let's just say it's hard to listen to.
When I first learned that I was going to die, I just didn't want to accept it, and I struck out at everyone I loved most. Especially you, James. I am so sorry for what I did to you. You've given me so much, and I haven't been able to return a single thing. James, you made me happy.
But wait, there's more. Because if James picks up the White Chrism, the Lost Memories book, the Obsidian Goblet, and the Crimson Ceremony book, then the same thing kind of happens, except that at the end, James will be zeroing to somewhere, and he's talking to Mary, telling her that the old gods haven't left, and that he's going to ask them to bring her back from the dead. However, if James finds the blue gem and uses it in the garden of the hospital, in the dock, and in the room where he watches the tape, then James will see some spaceships descending, and Harry from Silent Hill 1 will have a conversation with him, and an alien will stop him, and then all of them will fly away. And if James grabs the dog key that is inside a dog house and uses it to open the door that is next to the room where he watched the tape, then James will discover that the mastermind of all the happenings is none other than Dog.